Hello, I'm Steve Bomar. I was introduced to photography when I was a small child. My dad had a garage darkroom. It was magical how images appeared on a white sheet of paper. It is when I discovered not to carry an open yellow box to my dad and ask, "Can we make some pictures?" I love judging photographic competitions because it is like meeting new friends. Each image has a story to tell about the photographer that created it. To Jim Shannon, "You scared the willies out of me. For a moment I thought I had spilled something on your print. Then I saw the rip in the paper. Then I thought there was no way I did that. Oh, he damaged his print to make it look vintage. I must say, very clever idea for vintage, but you still scared me." As far as judging images go, I look for basic compositional elements, such as rule of thirds, leading lines, diagonal lines, repeating patterns. I look for a sense of depth in the image. Does the lighting create that awe moment? That moment when everyone sees the photograph at the same time in the room and they all go, "Ah." In this competition, I really look for the use of post-processing to create a vintage look. I was really impressed with your images as a group. Your club is full of great photographers. An early cold morning, 10 points. This is a nice fall image or winter image, I guess more fall because of the way the leaves are. Well, I like the overall idea of the image. There's a couple of compositional things that are sort of troubling for me. One is the barn is in the center of the image. The horizon on the riverbank is basically centered in the image. And having the image centered with the reflection is a normal reaction for people to put up. Another competing element in the image is the actual bushes in the foreground that are closest to photographer are competing with the reflection, which makes the image a little bit confusing to me. And then the reflection of the roof itself seems really bright, and that may be its interaction with the fog that made it look like that, or the photographer is trying to lighten up the reflection to get more detail. One of the things that's sort of entertaining is on the right-hand side of the image, there appears to be a pole or a tree in the reflection, but it's not in the background. So I'm not sure if they cloned out that or if it's just something in the water. Centurion helmet, 11 points. This image is very well done technically. The sharpness on the helmet is really great. The lighting is really soft, which makes it a nice image. The only thing that I really sort of counted off for this is the helmet was not really old looking. At least it didn't look like it was vintage to me. It looked like it was a costume piece and put into sort of a vintage environment. However, it's still sort of a vintage look. And then the helmet is really sort of centered in the image, and I can say that it would be hard to move it to the right because you would take the top of the hat out. And then the background is competing with the foreground with the image. Even though it's out of focus, it could have been darkened a little bit, you had something like that on it to make it pop out. 1898 Plano home. This is an excellent black and white capture of this home. The tonal range on the house itself is really great. You have the nice white and it goes down to the black tones, so you have all the gradations. Maybe a little bit more room for the home to sit in. It's really tight in the image. There's not enough room for the house to breathe. And then the sky is all white, and I would have cloned out the power lines on the right-hand side, got rid of those, maybe added some sky or some detail in the sky from some other image, something like that. And I really liked the little pumpkin on the front porch. I thought that was cool. It sort of gives you a time frame from when the image might have been taken. First granddaughter with the hat that grandma wore to say "I do," 12 points. I really like the idea of putting 6 portraits into one image, and it sort of captured the old-timey feel for a series of images like that. Also, the treatment gives you that sort of, okay, we've let the image fade a little bit, which makes it look vintage. And all of the images in the image have broad lighting, which typically you don't do for women because it makes their faces look wider and fatter. You want to do short lighting, and some images that we're going to look at have short lighting, so I'll mention that. But basically, the second image from the left is the most easiest example. Her whole side of her face is lit, and that's sort of broad light, and then on the right side of her face, it's sort of in shadow, which means that part is skinny. So she has great expressions throughout the portraits. They're nice and detailed, they're in focus, they're sharp. I really like the idea for this photograph. Feeling groovy, 13 points, honorable mention. This is a sort of an interesting image, I guess because I sort of grew up in that time frame. Overall, I wouldn't necessarily give this image an honorable mention because of the way the lighting is. It's very harsh lighting in the image. Our hands on the right side of the image holding a guitar are the brightest part of the image. But you know, your eye is drawn to the brightest spot, so my hands sort of go to her hands and then to his hand on the rock. But what really makes this image for me is the story of their relationship that they have, and also the treatment that you put on it gives it that vintage look from that time frame of having an image fade and sort of go yellow. So it sort of captures the feel of vintage, and it captures the feel of emotion between two people that lived in that time frame. Feeling groovy, 13 points, honorable mention, Brenda Armstrong. Shuttle's Own Mirror, 13 points, and third place. This image really caught my attention because of the nice warm tones and warm colors and the wood. I find that personally really appealing. When I started looking at it, I was trying to figure out where is the mirror, and I sort of had to turn it upside down a couple of times and turn it around to realize that the mirror is sort of right in the middle of the image, and the bottom half of the shuttle or whatever that thing is actually a reflection. You can tell it's a reflection because of the distortion along the edge of the lower piece, and you realize that the mirror is in between those two big pieces. And then the other things that I found a little distracting were maybe the color of the thread, because on the left-hand side you had more of a vintage-looking thread, and on the right-hand side it was more like fishing line. So that may have maybe counted down a little bit, but it's a really nice image, really great tones, and I really liked it. Well, I still like it. Shuttle's Own Mirror, 13 points, third place, Nancy Mack. The Paperboy, 14 points, second place, Lulu Warren. When I first saw this image, it sort of felt like it looked a little dull, but after looking at it for a while, I realized that this really captures the feeling of that vintage time. We got the vintage clothing. We have really nice soft lighting on his face. There's no really harshness in this image. It fits the time frame and the vintage look. Some of the things that I might do with this image a little differently, I might give him more room to look to where he's looking, because he might be looking at somebody, or the paper is about to be thrown down to him that he's going to deliver, something that he's looking to. Also, he's called a paper boy, I'm assuming, because of the clothing, but I would have liked to see him have papers, or on a bicycle, or something like that, an old-timey bicycle. But great capture, great expression, soft, gentle expression on his face. Jesse's Doll, 1910, 14 points, first place, Joyce Magnum. When I first saw this image, I was really impressed with how well the image was prepared for my viewing. Also, I like the sepia tone. I loved sepia tone. And then there's also the hint of pink and color in the image, even though it's really a muted, monotone type image. The placement of the doll in the image is really good because it follows like the rule of thirds. The eyes are not level, so they're diagonal, so it creates diagonal feel in the image with the eyes and the top of the hat. And where the doll is looking at is really properly placed for this type of portrait. The only drawback that I had on this image, someone who touches up portraits, is there's a little hair coming out of the top of the cap in the center of the forehead, and that hair does not belong in the doll, doesn't belong in the hat, so it really is not part of this image. So that was why I kind of drew off a point. And then there's some things I would have fixed along the collar. I would have gotten rid of some of those loose threads through post-processing, cleaned those up. But overall, this image is a fantastic capture. This is the intermediate class, and the first image is Hitching Post, 8 points. This image has some really nice colors in it, and it's a really nice find for a historical piece and a vintage piece of the hitching post. The areas that I would like to see improved would be the actual sharpness on the lower side of the horse. The face of the horse seems to be nice and sharp and in focus, but as his neck, it goes out of focus. A couple of other things. Under the nose of the horse, there's a bright white spots down there. That's sort of distracting. And then on the very top of the head of the horse, there's two little streaks of white up there, which sort of gives him horns. That's a little bit distracting. I think the overall centerness of the image causes it to drop down in score, but as a capture of something that you saw and that you felt like a need to show us because it was something important to you and historic, I think it's a good find. Waiting to be Played, 11 points. This is a great capture of a banjo, and actually it looks like a fairly old banjo, so it's a nice vintage piece. I would have liked to seen more light in this image. The blacks are too dark, so there's not enough detail in the background to support the banjo in the case, and there's no dividing line between the case and the background. That sort of cost me for giving it more points. And then the other thing, I would like to see a little bit more detail, something closer up with this banjo. It is nicely in the image in a nice diagonal way, so that's a nice compositional element to have. But other than that, the image really lacks the oomph to jump off the page. Looking through time, 11 points. I like the compositional elements of this image. You have the nice diagonal line going from the lower right corner up to the center, all the way up to the upper right corner. And then there's a centerness of the clock where it's up on that rule of third in the top line. That's a nice compositional construction. Also the curves of the circles coming through the image, the arcs that come through the image that form the place where the numbers are at for the time. And I like the actual treatment of the sepia tone. And I'm not really sure what I would do different with this image. I'm a little bit bothered by the building in the background because I can see it and it's so clear. And then what I'm looking in the front is so clear. It sort of doesn't make sense to me, but it's sort of distracting from the clock for me. Beginnings, 11 points. The sharpness in this image is really impressive. I can read the writing on the left-hand instrument over there, and I can read all the writing and the numbers on the other instrument. And then the case itself, you can read all the numbers there, the letters, and the purple color is really appealing. As far as composition, the box is really sort of straight on. The instrument is sort of diagonally in there, and the other one's sort of diagonal. So that sort of creates something a little bit, it's not static, but it is somewhat dynamic. But what really lacks for me for this image is I don't see enough of the instrument. I really don't know what a panometer is when I look at this. I think that there should be more focus on the instrument instead of the box. But technically, it's very sharp and the colors are really nice. And there is some rim light on the box which helps separate from the background. Venice, 12 points. This is a very nice silhouette type of an image. You can see details in the foreground of the boats, although it does sort of go black. But you can see some reflection of the water in there. It's got high contrast and it's highly dynamic. The poles make it very interesting. The difference between the building in the background and the foreground gives you depth in the image. Overall, this is a very nice piece. And the only thing I would say negative about the image is that the horizon, the shoreline, and the distance is in the middle of the image. I would have cropped out some from the top to get it off that center line. Nice work. Abandoned Love, 13 points. Honorable mention by Susan. I'm sorry, but I couldn't read your last name. This is a very fun image to look at. There's a lot of nice colors and the sunset colors in the image. And then the building is nicely placed in the image, compositionally wise. It's over on the one side, not quite in the center. You're not shooting straight on, so there's some diagonal lines, so it makes it more dynamic of an image. The actually matting is really cool. You got a nice stroke around the image with the nice orange color to match the sunrise or the sunset. It's a nicely prepared piece. The only thing that bothered me a little bit about the image was the trees in the background seemed to be a little bit blurry and blurred out because of the technique I think that you use more than wind. I don't think it was really windy. I think it's sort of a technique that was happening there. But very nice piece. I would see this type of image in the PPA competition as well. So it was a nice work. Mobsters Roundtable, 14 points, third place by James Edward. This is really fun to look at. These guys, I bet these are your best friends. I was looking through the image. I'm not sure the watches are vintage. I'm not sure the guy's shoe on the very left-hand side. They look sort of modern looking. The guys on the right look vintage. But overall, this is a fun image because their expressions are cool. They don't look like mobsters, though. They're smiling too much. But it's a nice idea, and they did a great job posing for you. You did a great job lighting them and capturing them. And then also the technique that you used on the image gives it that vintage look. One of the cool things about this image is their heads are all basically on the upper third line, and their knees are sort of on the lower third line. So you've got those compositional elements going for you, and the guy on the left and the guy on the right, they fall on the intersecting third line. So there's a lot of dynamics in this image that make this really exciting and interesting. Probably wondering where the beers are and where the guns are, and maybe a dead body in the background somewhere. But this is a great shot. Vintage Boots, 14 points, second place, Valerie Johnson. The matting on this image is fantastic. The preparation between the white and black going into the image, which is white and black. If you start in the lower left corner of this image, it's dark. Then there's a textured part where you can see the material, it's light. Then where the shoe comes in, it's dark, and then it's light, and then it's dark again as you go across the image, and light, and then dark. That's a repeating pattern of light and darkness, which is a really effective way to bring out your subject and detail in your image. And the lighting is really good on this image because you can see all of the detail and texture in the lace in the boots. And then on the boots themselves, you can see texture in the top of the boots. You can see detail in there, and you can really see the leather or the feel of the leather. And you can also see in the threads on the shoelaces, you can see all the texture in there. So this image is really well lit. It captures the detail of your subject. And it's not facing straight at me, but it's facing at a diagonal, which keeps that triangular diagonal line. And this is a wonderful piece. And I can't believe I gave second place to a pair of shoes, but this is a great shot. Remembrance of things past, 15 points. First place goes to James Walsh. This image is an amazing shot. The detail of all of the pieces, the letters, you can read them that are in the little cupboards, and on the little book you can read those. And the photograph at the top left of the little girl, the daughter, and the car. But every little piece is perfectly placed. The wine glass, the Western Union note, the United States Declaration of War. And what you don't know about this image is that I know is that paper makes sense to me. It means something to me, the United States Declaration of War, because my mom was staying at an independent living place over here in Fort Worth, and they had a place for the veterans, and that actual paper is on the wall. And the Declaration of War was taken. I think one person voted against it in the Senate. In a way, it means something to me that it may not mean to someone else. But the capture is very nice. Even though it's a straight-on image, there's nothing diagonal about it, but it makes sense for this image. And the color, the tonal range, everything is very beautiful in this image and makes me feel good. This is the advanced class prints. The first one is First Baptist Church, Minerva, organized 1807, 9 points. When I look at this image, it's sort of bland. There's not a lot of contrast, but there is a lot of contrast. It's sort of, if that makes any sense. I mean, you do have the whites on the building. They're sort of really white. There's not really a lot of detail in those. And then there's some dark colors in here, but there's just not enough quality of texture in the image to really make the image pop. The image is overall, it's nice and sharp. It's nice and clean. I mean, there's nothing really technically wrong with the image, except it just doesn't grab my attention. And some would say that the architecture was not straight. Some of your lines weren't straight. The roof is not straight. That doesn't bother me as much as it might someone else. But overall, the tonal range of the image is just a little bit low for me. Shaft of Light, 11 points. This is a nice capture that you took in New Mexico. I'm assuming that's New Mexico. I've been to that same location. I like the tonal range of the brick in the background, how it matches the tonal range of the ladder. I like the way the shaft of the light parallels the same angle as the ladder. I think those go together hand in hand. And then I like the way the light hits the ground in front of the ladder. You can see all the footprints in there, which I might have rubbed them out before you take the picture. That might make the image better. The only thing I would want to do differently is to try to match the exposure of the light hitting the ground with the exposure of the other dirt. And that's going to be hard to do because it's such a large number of stops between direct daylight and dark shade. But I would have tried to do it. Give me that Old Time Religion, 12 points. Honorable mention, Carol Barlow. This is a great capture. It's a great piece of static items put together. I like the way the Bible, or the book, could be hymnal, leads you into the image, to the candlestick, and the candlestick takes you up to the books on the top and wraps you back down to the original book. I like the lace in the image because it gives you that nice sort of vintage feel along with the age of the books. Everything says vintage, and it all works together, even the overall tonal range of yellowish color. And then around the border or the edges, the treatment that you did there adds to the vintage feel. The only thing I would want to do different with this image is to make it bigger. An 8 by 10 is really sort of small for a competition print. 11 by 14 is getting closer, and a 16 by 20 is a more proper size for a competition image. The Juggler, 12 points. Third place, Bud Barlow. Technically, this image is very well done. Everything is nice and sharp and crisp. The exposure is very wonderful. There's nothing really blown out. The interesting thing may be the little things flying through the air, the juggling thing that he's juggling. I'm not sure how you did that, but that's sort of entertaining. The only thing that I would say that is a challenge in this image is actually the black cloth. And when you start doing black and you start doing what the sensor of the image can do, it sort of can cause mushiness of the pixels that make it not look quite so good. But that, even though you did a good job capturing those exposures. And then the other thing I had to look at for a few minutes to figure out that it was okay was the little white spots in the bottom of the image, which is a reflection of the hat. that hat actually has those little white spots, so they're actually supposed to be there. But for me, initially, it was like, okay, got to get rid of those, got to clone them out. But they're supposed to be there. Great image. Catherine on Anton Bridge. Like I said earlier in my introduction, this image really scared me because everything was damaged and torn. You really did a great job of making this image look vintage. And this is what it's supposed to look like. This is what this image is supposed to look like, a vintage image. But if you're going to do actual portraits, you don't want faces to be so hot and harsh, like her hair and her face on the side of her cheek. You want to have the ratio between the light side and the dark side to be a little bit closer there. I'm wondering if you actually pasted her, copied and pasted her in this image, because I don't see her feet. And her pose is, wonderful and great. There's nothing wrong with this image because you actually did what they wanted you to do, create a vintage image. And I think you did it by ripping it up and soaking it and putting in different things and the funny little color on the right-hand side. A great job of scaring the judge. Super Rabbit, 15 points, first place by Don Chapman. This is an excellent piece of work, an excellent capture. Obviously, you've done some post manipulation in the image with the sky. It doesn't quite line up with the ground, but it doesn't really bother me that much because of what the image does. It creates all that light and texture and shape, and it really looks like a vintage photograph would be if you did a vintage photograph of him back in the past. This is a lot of fun, and it may help because I'm a pilot. The only thing I might change on the image is give it some more space for that nose to see the whole needle of the nose, maybe a little bit more space on the right to see a little bit more of the wing and all the propellers. And then on the oil on the ground, I might have cloned that out because I don't really see it on the other side, but on the other side it could be blocked by that wheel. I really like this image. Jazz Age, 8 points. I like the matting that you selected for this image to give sort of that, trying to capture the vintage feel. In the images of the people, they are the vintage costume, and you have the guys in the band in the back with the vintage band. It all says vintage, but the lighting is really cost a lot here because the lighting is really harsh on their shoulders, their arms, and the top of their hats. That made me mark the image down, and that's hard to control in a situation like that. You have to use fill light to be able to do that. And you have to be able to do that well. And one of the things I might have done in this image, instead of capturing them dancing, maybe just their feet and their shadows, because those shadows look really entertaining on their feet. It might have been a better image if you go down there and photograph just their feet and the shadows itself. But this is a nice capture for where you're at. Storms Are Coming, 9 points. This has a nice vintage feel in the texture and everything you did in the image. I would have really liked to see the names on the tombstones. I think that tells a story about a tombstone, not the back of it. And that was a major part of your image, so that really distracted from me from being able to score this image high. The other is the title is Storm Is Coming doesn't really tell me anything about what I'm looking at. What I'm really looking at, the major part of the image, is the headstones there in the front of the image. So that was really why I scored it lower. There are some good points about it. You got a diagonal line going from the left lower corner up as you go up the tombstones, up into the trees. That works. The way the trees sort of frame the one on the right. But then the treatment that above the gravestone, it sort of looks like it's either a cloud or some burning something there that didn't quite work. Overall, the image does have interest, but for me it wasn't compelling. Antique Stereoscope, 10 points. This image is a little bit static for me. It is a static image, but the straight-onness of the piece in the back sort of detracts from me. I like the overall tonal range of the image, and I would have liked to seen some more quality of light on the right-hand side of the viewing device, because on the left-hand side you've got it. On the right-hand side it's sort of washed out. It sort of doesn't have that snap in that side of the image. And then on the inside, where your nose would go when you're viewing with this device, that all looks sort of soft in there. I would have liked to have seen it a little bit sharper. But this is an amazing story of these people's lives that are in the image going through war and what they went through. Aeronautical Face-Off, 10 points. This image is an interesting idea. I don't know where you would see planes like that, I guess in a museum. And one of the things that, I guess the overall image to me has that low tonal range. And I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to capture that vintage feel of a photograph taken back in that time period. But it doesn't have the contrast or the pop that I would want to have in a plane or these planes, because they would have that pop. I would have liked to see the propellers in a different position so I could actually see it. It has propellers. It almost looks like there are no propellers on these planes. So I'm not sure how that would work, how you could capture them from the side like that. except maybe if they were up and down instead of from side to side. You did a great job in matting the image, and the idea is an interesting idea. I'd like to see some more shots of this, though. John Moulton Barn, 10 points. When I look at this image, I see compositional things that are really working. Your horizon line is a little bit below or about around the third line in the background with the mountain base. And you have some really nice contrast in the barn and the grass in the front like that. And in the hillside in the back, there's a lot of nice contrast, a lot of nice pop in those part of the images. One of the challenges for me in this image is that the ability to see the barn. There's a lot of competition with the background and the barn itself to be able to see it. You have to really want to see it. Something that may have helped the image, if you could get John riding a horse at the barn or doing something a person that's doing something interesting might help this image, but it's not necessarily necessary. It might help it. Vintage Pistol, 11 points. This is a very nicely done technically shot. Everything's in focus, everything is in sharp. You got one bullet sticking a little bit up and one bullet sticking a little bit down. Looks like something may be going to happen soon. Something I might want to do on this image is to crop out the right side a little bit, because I think there may be too much detail over there. I might bring the crop out enough so you can take half the guy's arm away, so I'm really focused more on that gun than anything else, because that's the title. Another thing is I used to do sepia in the darkroom a lot, and I know that this is what you're trying to go for, but this is a little bit not sepia. It's a brownish, more brown than what a sepia would normally be. Overall, the image is interesting, it is compelling, and there is a nice focus and technical aspect of the image. Treasure in the Barn, 11 points. This image has some nice qualities about it. I like the overall dynamic range of the image and exposure. Even though it was taken in the middle of the day, you have the detail and information where you want it, and the contrastiness helps the image. The wood piece on the very top comes in at an angle that's nice. However, the texture and stuff on it makes it a little distracting. It's a little bit bright. It's the brightest part of the image, so it becomes a little bit distracting. The drum barrel thing in the back on the right-hand side is a nice circular piece which adds some shape into the image, which adds interest. On the left-hand side of the image, the pole that sort of comes through and sort of bends through the image, to me is a little distracting. I might have darkened that piece down a little bit, because it sort of interferes with me seeing the lantern itself, which is what the subject of the image is. And the exposure on that piece is nice. Again, this is not quite a sepia tone, but it is a nice sort of aged look, which works well. Vintage Dodge, 11 points. The way that this truck is placed in the image is very nice. It has a nice dynamic look into it. It's not straight on, but it's off to one side, so you can see down the whole truck. You can see the nice shape of the tires and the rims, and you can see the texture in the tires in the back. Also, you can see the pumpkins back there, and there's texture in the walls. And on the right-hand side, there's pumpkins in the background on the shelf. Those look really interesting. Overall, this image is a really nice image, or a really nice capture. I like the way it was done with the blacks and the coloring and shape and stuff like that. The tonal range, I guess, is the proper word. Great image. Closed for winter, 12 points. This is a very nice capture of snow. You don't really see a lot of blown out places in the snow. You don't see a lot of detail, but it's got that nice sort of exposure color that you would have. It sort of gives it a gray look, actually, on the snow. But what's really impressive about this image, to me, is the actual composition. I mean, the horizon line, the base of the trees is on the third line. On the left-hand side, you have the truck on that intersection of the third line. Then you have the house in the middle, or the store in the middle, and it leads over to the Gulf sign on the left-hand side, which is also basically on that rule of third line. So compositionally, this image is really nice. The skies have clouds in them, which makes it look like it might snow any minute. Overall, the image is really nice, and I like the treatment around the edge as well, and the matte. Great job. Old Locomotive, Ely, Nevada, 12 points. This has a really nice treatment on it, a sepia tone treatment that actually gives it that really nice vintage look. And you have a person in the image, which adds interest. You have the train in there, which is a vintage train. You have lighting in there that's not quite vintage, but it's great lighting on your train, which helps. There's water bottles in the cab of the train, which aren't vintage, or the soda bottle in the front, which is not necessarily vintage. But overall, I really like this image and what's happening in the photograph. And one of the things you might think about when you're doing photos, if you have a pole in the middle like this, and I know you can't help it in this image, but poles divide up images into two pieces. So, and other images or photographs that you may be taking, you want to watch out for those poles that stick right up in the middle of the image, because it divides the image in half. Remembering the Cowboy, 12 points, honorable mention. Dennis, and I'm not going to say your last name because I'm not sure how to say it. This is a great capture for this guy. This is a great portrait. The detail in the mustache and his hair is just absolutely amazing. Obviously a natural light photograph because of the reflection of the highlights in his eyes. You can tell that it's from a window or from someplace that's close to a window. Great image, great use of vignette on the image. Overall, this is a fantastic photo. I would have scored it higher if it had not been quite as dark. If the face and image had been a little bit lighter, it would have popped off the page a little bit more, and I would have scored it higher. But great capture. 19th Century Cemetery in Buenos Aires, 12 points, honorable mention to Jen Carrick. This is a interesting photo. I think I've seen something like this before, but the way the light comes through the middle image and creates a diagonal line through the image is really fantastic. And you have the warm tones of the sun versus the blue tones in the shade. It really is a nice composition doing it that way. And there's a lot of detail in the image. I guess you could say it was too busy because there's nothing really to settle my eye on as far as subject. But as the sun comes through, it hits cross after cross after cross after cross after cross after cross. And for some reason, that is the subject, is the cross. 1909 Apothecary Shop unlocked after 70 years. 13 points, third place, Maria Downey. I really like the tonal range of this image. It's got the nice warm tone in it. It has some nice compositional elements of the little plaque on the wall, and then you have the line that comes down, and you have the diagonal line of the shelf through there, and you have the basket of cookies or whatever those are that are pointing into the image. Those are really good. The only thing I would have liked to seen is better depth of field. So like the wine glasses in the foreground, I would have liked to have seen them in focus. That would have put me to the first place for that. If that was in focus, I would have taken you to the top. But this is a nice static capture of history. Put out to pasture, 13 points, second place, Marie Hansen. This is a nice muted color image that tries to create the feel of the vintage look, which I think it does do that. It doesn't try, it does do that. You have the elements of the car on the upper right-hand corner, which is that intersection line for the rule of thirds, and on the left-hand corner we have that contraption of whatever it is, a broken and meshed metal with the tire hanging in midair that actually leads you into the cars and into the image. I tried not to like this because I don't like car pictures or old truck pictures that much, but the compositional elements of those two things put together really make sense. The horizon line being on the rule of third line at the top really is great. The lone trees in the background and the desolate foreground, which really talks about the feeling of death and loss in these cars or in that place of the junkyard. Great capture. Windmill, Frisco, Texas, 14 points, first place, Jose Ardiles. I was looking at this image, and there's things sometimes I don't want to like an image, but this one I kept coming back to because of its composition. You have the windmill on the right, third line, it goes all the way up, and you have that windmill fan, the blades up there at the intersection point of the third line. You have the building behind it, which makes a connection to the image. And then the building on the left, which is in the lower left rule of third line. And then you have the tree in the background. It sort of all adds shape and balance to this image. It adds the story of the prairie, of the time going by. However, I'm not sure that's an old windmill because it looks like it's a metal one. It may work better if you had a wooden windmill, but you can't get better in first place. And then you have the trees in the front, which actually frame the image. You have the clouds in the back, which stream through, and it creates intersecting lines for the top of the windmill. Everything in this image flows together so well, I selected it for first place. Thank you for asking me to judge your images. It takes a lot of courage to enter a competition. I learned a long time ago that judges say the craziest things. Take everything in that a judge tells you. Chew on it for a few days, then spit out the bad and keep the good. It works for me. Thank you.